The world was supposed to be simple. It was built on a foundation of unshakable truths. Alphas led, omegas followed, and betas kept the whole machine running. Alphas were dominant, territorial, and biologically incapable of submitting, let alone conceiving. This was the bedrock of my reality, the core of my identity. Which is why, when the world decided to tilt on its axis and pitch me headfirst into the absurd, I found myself on my knees in a sterile, white-tiled bathroom, staring at a small plastic stick that was screaming a biological impossibility. 2 stark blue lines. Positive. A week ago, I had been celebrating my freedom. My life, which had been consumed by a singular, maddening obsession, was finally my own again. The fight with Elias Thorne had been the stuff of legends, a catastrophic implosion that had left nothing but scorched earth and the bitter taste of regret. We had held words like weapons, each one designed to find the softest part of the other and twist. I'm done, Elias. I swear to God, I am done making a fool of myself for you. I had roared, my voice raw with a fury that felt bottomless. My chest heaved, my own alpha scent, usually a point of pride, smelling of cedar and storm-tossed sea, now felt like a choking cloud of failure in the apartment we'd briefly, disastrously shared. He'd stood by the door, infuriatingly calm, his posture a study in elegant disdain. Even in the heat of battle, he was beautiful. It was a curse. His silver blonde hair seemed to catch the low light, and the tiny, perfect mole just beside his lip, the very mark that had launched my ill-fated crusade, seemed to mock me. Was I stopping you, Julian? His voice was silk, laced with ice. You're the one who chased. You're the one who begged. Don't rewrite history now to cast yourself as the martyr. It's unbecoming. The truth of his words was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. If you walk out that door, I'd managed, the threat tasting like ash, we are nothing. We never happened. Erased. His hand had paused on the doorknob, the briefest hesitation. For a split second, a wild, stupid hope flared in my chest. Then, he'd turned his head just enough to meet my gaze, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, holding a chilling finality. Suit yourself, Croft. The click of the latch was the sound of my world breaking. That night, I deleted his number, blocked his profile, and systematically purged every digital and physical trace of him from my life. I went out with friends, drank too much expensive whiskey, and flirted with a pretty beta who laughed at all my jokes. I was Julian Croft, an alpha, a man who took what he wanted and never looked back. I was reclaiming my pride. But my body, it seemed, had other plans. It began with a dizzy spell at the gym a few days ago, which I'd blamed on dehydration. Then came the nausea, a relentless, rolling wave that ambushed me at the scent of coffee, of fried bacon, of the very foods I'd always loved. I'd chalked it up to a vicious hangover, a stomach bug, anything but the truth. The truth was too ludicrous to contemplate. It was the scent that finally broke me. I was walking past a bakery this morning, and the sweet, cloying smell of cinnamon rolls hit me. My stomach didn't just churn, it violently seized. I barely made it to a nearby public restroom before I was sick, retching until my throat was raw and tears streamed from my eyes. Shaking and pale, leaning against the cool tile, a cold, terrifying thought, a whisper from the darkest, most illogical corner of my mind, took root. It was insane. It was impossible. But the memory of our last time together, of his weakened state during his susceptibility period, of the one and only time our clash had resulted in a biological completion, flashed behind my eyes. The walk to the pharmacy was a blur. I'd bought the test with a sense of surreal detachment, feeling like an actor in a badly written play. Now, the results lay on the floor beside my trembling hand. 2 blue lines. An alpha. Pregnant. My world wasn't just tilted anymore. It had been turned inside out, shaken until every piece of it came loose. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, sharp and humorless. Pregnant. And the other father, the man whose remarkable biology had apparently shattered the laws of nature, was Elias Thorne. The man I had sworn to never see again. The man who, if his parting words were any indication, would rather set himself on fire than ever have to look at my face again. I clutched my head, the clean, antiseptic smell of the bathroom doing nothing to calm the storm in my gut. My pride was in ashes. My future was a question mark. And I had no choice. I had to go back to the one person who had the power to destroy me completely. I had to find Elias. My first instinct was to run. To flush the damning piece of plastic down the toilet, walk out of the bathroom, and pretend this fever dream had never happened. I could disappear, move to a different city, a different country even. An alpha raising a child alone wasn't unheard of, but an alpha birthing one? I would be a pariah, a medical curiosity, a freak. My family, the proud and traditional Crofts, would be shattered by the shame. My father, a man who viewed the world in rigid, alpha-centric terms, would likely disown me on the spot. The weight of it all was crushing, a physical pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But as I stared at the two blue lines, a different, quieter instinct began to stir beneath the panic. It wasn't about pride or logic. It was a primal, protective current that hummed deep in my bones. This wasn't an abstract concept anymore. This was a life that was half me and half him. As much as I loathed to admit it, as much as my pride screamed in protest, this wasn't a burden I could, or should, bear alone. The child deserved to know its other father, and Elias Thorne, for all his infuriating, cold-hearted arrogance, deserved to know he was about to become one. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I pushed myself to my feet. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a pale, haunted version of the confident man I was supposed to be. My eyes were wide with a terror I hadn't felt since I was a child. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it helping to ground me. One step at a time. The first step was the hardest. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of water, my hands still shaking so badly that the glass rattled against my teeth. I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the room amplifying the frantic thumping of my heart. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over his blocked contact. It felt like admitting defeat. Every fiber of my being recoiled from the act, from undoing the one definitive action I had taken to save my own sanity. Gritting my teeth, I navigated the menus and tapped unblock. His name and picture reappeared in my contacts list, a ghost I thought I had successfully exorcised. My fingers felt clumsy as I typed out a message. What do you even say? Hey, remember me? The guy you dumped a week ago. Funniest thing happened. I deleted it. We need to talk. Too demanding. Elias, it's Julian. Something's come up. It's important. That sounded sterile, detached. Finally, I settled on the simplest, most direct approach. Elias, I need to see you. I hit send, and my stomach immediately plummeted. The message sat there, a single grey checkmark beside it. Delivered. I waited, watching the screen, my breath held tight in my chest. A minute passed. Then two. Then, the single grey checkmark was joined by a small, red exclamation point and the words, Message not delivered. This person is not receiving messages from you at this time. He had blocked me too. Of course, he had. He had meant what he said. Suit yourself, Croft. He was erasing me just as thoroughly as I had tried to erase him. The humiliation was a fresh, hot wave that washed over me, even more potent than the nausea. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a mutual declaration of war, and I had just tried to wave a white flag, only to have it shot out of my hand. Fine. If technology was his shield, I would have to resort to more primitive methods. I knew his routine. It was one of the things I'd learned during my relentless pursuit, as he'd so charitably called it. He worked at a high-end architectural firm downtown, and every evening, like clockwork, he would leave at 6, decline the company car service, and walk the 12 blocks home to his minimalist, achingly stylish apartment. He claimed the walk cleared his head. So, that evening, I became a stalker. I found a spot across the street from his office building, lurking in the shadows of a stone archway like some noir detective. The autumn air was crisp, and the city was beginning to sparkle to life as the sun dipped below the skyline. I felt pathetic, my expensive leather jacket doing little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Every passing minute stretched into an eternity. At precisely 6:02 p.m., the revolving doors of his building pushed him out onto the sidewalk. My breath caught. Even from a distance, he was luminous. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit, his silver blonde hair catching the light of the street lamps. He moved with an innate grace that always made me feel clumsy and oversized by comparison. He didn't look around. His focus was always forward, as if the rest of the world were merely scenery for him to pass through. As he started his walk, I slipped out of the shadows and crossed the street, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fell into step a dozen paces behind him, then 10. My mouth was dry. He reached the corner and waited for the light to change. This was it. I stepped up beside him. Elias. He didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. But I saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible stiffening of his shoulders. The light changed, and he stepped off the curb, moving away as if I hadn't spoken, as if I were nothing more than a gust of wind. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I lunged forward, stepping directly into his path and forcing him to stop. Wait. He finally looked at me then, but his gaze was cold, impersonal. He looked at me the way one might look at a piece of litter on the sidewalk. "Julian Croft," he said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur that was somehow more cutting than a shout. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you make it explicitly clear that we were to pretend we'd never met? That you wouldn't be making a fool of yourself over me anymore? Yet here you are, ambushing me on the street. It seems your resolutions are as fleeting as your temper." The barb hit its mark. I clenched my jaw, the shame warring with a surge of defensive anger. This isn't that. I have something. I have to tell you something important. A flicker of something, amusement, pity, crossed his features. A faint, humorless smirk touched his lips. The damn mole beside them seemed to wink at me. "Oh, what is it this time, Julian? Did your car break down? Did you get locked out of your apartment? Have you invented another crisis that only I can solve? I've grown tired of your games." He was convinced this was just another one of my pathetic ploys to get his attention. The injustice of it, the sheer, arrogant condescension, made my vision swim with red. My carefully constructed composure shattered. All the fear, the confusion, and the fury of the past week coalesced into two unbelievable words that tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. "I'm pregnant." His smirk vanished. His brows drew together in a line of pure confusion, his head tilting slightly as if he'd misheard me. The noise of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, seemed to fade into a dull roar. For a long, silent moment, he just stared. Then, a low, incredulous sound escaped him. It wasn't quite a laugh, more like a scoff that had been strangled at birth. "Are you truly this desperate?" he asked, his voice laced with a new, sharper kind of disdain. "To invent a lie so utterly preposterous just to get a reaction? You, an alpha, pregnant. It's the most pathetic, transparent ploy I have ever heard. Honestly, Julian, I almost feel sorry for you." He thought it was a lie. A sick, desperate trick. I knew he would, but hearing it, seeing the pity in his eyes, was like being doused in gasoline. My hand shot into my jacket pocket, my fingers closing around the folded piece of paper I'd gotten from the clinic that afternoon, a confirmation far more concrete than a plastic stick. I yanked it out and shoved it against his chest, the paper crinkling in my fist. "I'm not lying, you arrogant bastard," I snarled, my voice shaking with a volatile mix of rage and despair. "See for yourself." Elias flinched back from my touch as if I were carrying a contagion, but his eyes, sharp and analytical, dropped to the paper I had thrust at him. It was an official letterhead from the Omega and Reproductive Health Clinic, the only place I could think to go for a blood test that wouldn't immediately flag me as a biological anomaly and have me carted off to a lab. His long, elegant fingers, the same fingers I had once dreamed of lacing with my own, took the sheet from my trembling hand. The street corner became our stage. A few passers-by shot us curious looks. Two well-dressed alphas in a tense standoff was not an everyday sight, but Elias seemed oblivious, his entire world narrowing to the black ink on the white page. I watched his face, cataloguing every micro-expression. I saw the initial skepticism, the hard line of his mouth, the cynical arch of his brow. Then, as he read, I saw the shift. It was subtle, a barely perceptible widening of his winter sky eyes, a sudden stillness that fell over him, as if all the air had been vacuumed from his personal space. The damning evidence was right there, HCG levels that were not just present, but unequivocally high. My name, Julian Alexander Croft, printed at the top. And the diagnosis, typed in stark, clinical letters, atypical alpha gestation. Confirmed. He read it once. Then a second time, his gaze moving more slowly, as if trying to find the flaw in the logic, the typo, the trick. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The sounds of the city returned, but they felt distant, muted. Finally, he lifted his head, the paper held loosely in his hand. The pity was gone from his eyes, replaced by a profound, shell-shocked bewilderment that was almost more unnerving. "This is—" He started, his voice a low whisper. "Impossible." "Tell me about it," I bit out, the sarcastic edge to my voice doing little to hide the raw panic underneath. Believe me, impossible was the first word out of my mouth. The second was probably a string of curses you'd find offensive. But there it is. So, I'll ask you again. What are we going to do about it? The "we" hung in the air between us, a word loaded with a history I had promised to erase. Elias's focus drifted from my face to the bustling street, then back again, his mind clearly racing, trying to process a reality that had just been fundamentally rewritten. He was an architect, a man who dealt in blueprints, in physics, in rules. This broke every rule he knew. He clicked his tongue, a sharp, irritated sound. He folded the paper with precise, deliberate movements and handed it back to me. "Have you told your parents?" he asked, the question so practical, so mundane, that it caught me completely off guard. "Told my parents." I balked. "Are you insane? My father would have an aneurysm. My mother would. I don't know, probably faint. No, I haven't told them. You're the first person to know." He let out a long, slow breath, pinching the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger, a gesture I knew meant he was deeply, profoundly frustrated. It was a gesture I had seen 100 times during our arguments. For a strange, fleeting moment, it almost felt familiar. "Normal. Go home, Julian," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual cool composure, though I could now detect a faint, frayed edge. "Tell them. And wait for me." He started to turn away, his intention to resume his walk clear. My mind reeled. Wait for what? I called after him, my confusion mounting. He paused, his back still to me. The lamplight caught the silver strands of his hair. Without turning, he threw a single word over his shoulder, each syllable dropping into the evening air like a stone. A proposal. And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians, leaving me standing on the corner, utterly poleaxed. A proposal? Marriage? Was he serious? Did he think a wedding ring was some magic wand that could fix this biological catastrophe? My first thought wasn't relief, but a fresh surge of indignation. He was taking control, mapping out our future without so much as a discussion, just as he always did. I hurried after him, my long legs easily catching up. Whoa, hold on a second. A proposal? We don't have to do that. We could just, you know. I made a vague, dismissive gesture with my hand. Get rid of it. The words tasted vile as I said them, a betrayal of that new, protective instinct that had taken root in me. But my pride, my stupid, wounded pride, couldn't stand the thought of being railroaded into a life with a man who had made it so clear he wanted nothing to do with me. I wanted to see if he would take the out I was offering. Elias stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly, and for the first time that evening, he looked at me with something other than disdain or shock. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief. A short, sharp laugh escaped his lips, devoid of any humor. "Julian Croft," he said, shaking his head as if marveling at a particularly baffling specimen. "I have never in my life met anyone as flippant as you." He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked away, his stride purposeful and swift, leaving me standing there in the middle of the sidewalk, stunned into silence. Flippant? How was I the flippant one? I was the one whose body had been hijacked, whose life had been thrown into chaos. Damn him. Damn his arrogance. Getting involved with Elias Thorne wasn't just bad luck. It was a curse, a cosmic joke with a punchline I was only just beginning to understand. I watched his retreating figure until he was just a silhouette in the distance, a cold dread mixing with my anger. He was really going to do this. He was going to propose. And I had the sickening feeling that, for the first time in my life, I was utterly and completely out of my depth. To understand the sheer magnitude of the disaster I was now facing, you have to understand the beginning. You have to understand Elias Thorne. He wasn't just another alpha. He was a phenomenon. I first saw him at a fundraiser gala my father had dragged me to. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels, a stifling environment I usually navigated with bored indifference. Then, across the room, I saw him. He was standing near the French doors leading out to the terrace, holding a glass of champagne, listening to some old magnet drone on. He was dressed in a classic tuxedo, But on him, it looked less like a uniform and more like a second skin. It was his stillness that caught me first, a profound calm in a room buzzing with frantic energy. He had the kind of ethereal, almost tragic beauty you see in old paintings of fallen angels. Silver blonde hair that looked soft as silk, a sharp, aristocratic jawline, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. And then there was the mole. A tiny, dark speck just to the right of his Cupid's bow. It was an insignificant detail, a minor flaw on a canvas of perfection, but it was utterly devastating. It drew the eye, hinted at a story, made him seem less like a statue and more like a man. In that moment, the bedrock of my reality, that alphas are drawn to omegas, crumbled into dust. I didn't care about biology. I didn't care about logic. I saw him, and a single, primal thought echoed through my mind. Mine. I was Julian Croft. I came from a family with old money and a good name. I was considered a prime catch, an alpha who was used to getting what he wanted with a charming smile and a confident swagger. Rejection was not a concept I was familiar with. So, I did what I always did. I approached. "I don't think we've met," I said, sliding into the conversation with the ease of a man who believes he belongs everywhere. Julian Croft. The old magnate beamed, but Elias just slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping over me with a cool, detached appraisal that instantly set my teeth on edge. There was no flicker of interest, no reciprocal alpha sizing up. He just looked at me. "Elias Thorne," he said, his voice as smooth and cool as his expression. And then he turned back to the magnate, dismissing me as if I were a waiter who had interrupted him. I was gobsmacked. And, to my eternal shame, completely hooked. Thus began my relentless pursuit. I used every trick in my well-worn playbook. I accidentally ran into him at his favorite coffee shop. I sent a rare, first edition book on architectural theory to his office. I leveraged my family's connections to get invited to the same small, exclusive dinners. For half a month, I groveled, charmed, and practically tap-danced for his attention. Each attempt was met with the same polite, impenetrable wall of indifference. He was a high, unattainable flower on a distant cliff, and the more he refused to be plucked, the more obsessed I became. Then, fate, or perhaps a cruel cosmic trickster, handed me an opportunity. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned his susceptibility period was approaching. For most alphas, it's a minor inconvenience, a few days of heightened irritability and a faint, cloying sweetness to their scent. But for a small percentage, it's a period of genuine vulnerability, a hormonal crash that leaves them weakened, their instincts dulled. I didn't know which camp Elias fell into, but I was willing to bet on it. I showed up at his apartment with a bottle of his favorite scotch and a fabricated story about needing his advice on a real estate investment. He opened the door, and I knew instantly I'd hit the jackpot. He was pale, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. His usually pristine scent of fresh rain and petrica was clouded with that telltale sweetness. He looked exhausted, and for the first time, vulnerable. My moment had come. I was going to be the dominant one, the one to finally break through his icy exterior, to hold this beautiful, delicate man in my arms. And yet, even weakened, he fought me. When I pushed him back against the door and leaned in to kiss him, he met me with a strength that shocked me. The struggle was brief, intense, and ended with me, Julian Croft, flat on my back on his expensive Persian rug with him pinning my wrists above my head, his chest heaving. He stared down at me, his winter eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and something else, something I couldn't decipher. "Is this what you wanted, Julian?" he'd panted, his voice rough. "To take advantage of me? To prove you could?" I was humiliated, defeated, and yet, staring up at him, at the flush on his pale cheeks and the fire in his eyes, my desire only intensified. In a moment of sheer, desperate honesty, I gave up the game.
Fine hybrid.
Yes, that's what I wanted. But not like this. I want you. That was the turning point. After that night, the night where I had been the one held down, the one who submitted, he didn't ignore me anymore. He started returning my calls. He agreed to dinner. He treated me with a cautious, almost clinical curiosity that slowly, painstakingly, morphed into something that resembled affection. The art of pursuing a lover, I learned, required patience. Sometimes you had to give a little, or in my case, a lot of pride, to get what you wanted. But a problem arose.
A fundamental, ego-shattering problem.
I was always the one getting pinned down. The one time I had tried to take advantage had set a precedent. Every time we were together, he was the one in control. I tried to turn the tables, to reclaim my alpha birthright, but he was stronger, quicker, and possessed a stubborn will that dwarfed my own. It became a running battle, a source of constant, simmering frustration that finally boiled over into our last, spectacular fight. "You're unbelievable," I had yelled, pacing his living room. "I'm an alpha, Elias. I have swallowed my pride and let you do this many times. Can't you let me have a turn, just for once?" He had been leaning against his bookshelf, arms crossed, a maddeningly calm smirk on his face. "Did I ever force you, Julian?" he'd countered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who was the one who clung to me relentlessly? Who tried to take advantage of me during my susceptibility period? You knew exactly what you were getting into. Now you want to play the victim? Who are you putting on this show for?" His words were daggers, because they were painfully, brutally right. But my pride wouldn't let me back down. I'm an alpha too. I can't just be on the bottom forever. That's when he turned and walked to the door. That's when I'd shouted my final, foolish ultimatum. And that's when he'd slammed the door on whatever it was we had. Now, standing on a busy street corner with his impossible proposal hanging in the air, I realized the bitter truth. From the very beginning, I had never been the one in control. And it seemed I never would be. The walk home was a trudge through a fog of disbelief. The conversation with Elias replayed in my mind on a dizzying loop. His initial shock, his infuriatingly practical questions, his final, stunning declaration. A proposal. The word echoed, mocking me. He hadn't asked. He had decreed. I arrived at my apartment and stood outside the door for a long moment, gathering the tattered remnants of my courage. Telling him had been like ripping off a bandage. Telling my parents would be like performing open-heart surgery on myself with a rusty spoon. I found them in the dining room, just finishing dinner. My father, Marcus Croft, sat at the head of the table, a formidable presence even in his casual evening attire. He was the epitome of an old guard alpha, proud, unyielding, with a belief in tradition that was set in stone. My mother, Eleanor, was the softer counterpoint, an elegant beta whose warmth and social grace were the glue that held our family's reputation together. They were in a good mood, laughing about something a friend had said. The sound of their easy happiness made my stomach clench. "Julian, darling, you're just in time for dessert," my mother said, her smile bright. "I made your favorite, chocolate lava cakes." The mere thought of the rich, sweet dessert sent a wave of nausea through me. I forced a weak smile and shook my head, sinking into a chair. "No, thanks, Mom. Not hungry." I picked at a loose thread on the placemat, avoiding their eyes. My mother's smile faltered. Her gaze sharpened, the way it always did when she sensed something was amiss. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look pale." "He always looks pale when he's been working too hard and not eating properly," my father grumbled, folding his newspaper. But he was watching me too, his usual gruffness overlaid with a sliver of concern. There was no avoiding it. No graceful way to ease into a conversation about the complete and utter implosion of natural law. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and inadequate. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. "I have something to tell you, and I need you both to promise me that you won't overreact." They exchanged a look, the silent, shorthand communication of a couple married for 30 years. My father put down his paper. My mother folded her hands on the table. The room went quiet, filled with a sudden, tense anticipation. I decided to just tear the whole bandage off at once. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Not just a lack of noise, but a heavy, profound void that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow against the stillness. My mother's face was a perfect, frozen mask of incomprehension. My father looked as if I'd just confessed to being a space alien. After what felt like a lifetime, my mother finally found her voice. It was a faint, bewildered whisper. "Pregnant? What do you mean, pregnant? Did you get some poor girl pregnant, Julian?" "No, Mom," I said, my gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. "Not get someone pregnant. I am pregnant." I watched my mother's mind trying to compute the sentence. Her expression went from confused to blank to utterly horrified. My father, recovering more quickly, interjected, his voice sharp with disbelief. Alexander, this is no time for jokes. Are you absolutely certain? You're an alpha. I finally lifted my head and met his gaze, letting him see the desperate sincerity in my eyes. I'm sure. 100%. I pulled the clinic report from my pocket and slid it across the table. That shut them up again. The silence returned, thicker this time, as they both stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. My father picked it up, his hand, usually so steady, trembling slightly. My mother just stared into the middle distance, her teacup forgotten. Good Lord, my father finally breathed, dropping the paper. He looked older, suddenly. More fragile. My mother exhaled, a long, shaky sigh. Her practical nature began to reassert itself over the shock. And whose child is it? This was the second bombshell. Elias Thorne's. Both of them stiffened in unison. The Thornes and the Crofts moved in the same circles. My father and Elias's father were old colleagues, friendly rivals who shared a mutual, grudging respect. This situation had just gone from a private, biological anomaly to a full-blown high society scandal in the making. My mother let out another long sigh, this one laced with weary resignation. Does Elias know? What did he say? I scratched the back of my neck, feeling a flush of heat creep up it. He knows. He said he's coming over to propose. I thought my father's head was going to explode. His face went from pale to a dangerous shade of red.
Propose.
That arrogant young pup thinks he can just. Marcus, please. My mother cut in, her voice firm. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to parse. And you, Julian? How in God's name did you and another alpha even end up in a situation where this was possible? So, I told them. I told them everything. The initial infatuation, the relentless chase, the humiliating reversal of roles, the final, explosive fight. I left nothing out. By the end of it, I felt raw and exposed, every foolish, prideful mistake laid bare under the harsh light of their judgment. When I finished, they were both quiet for a long time. Finally, my father shook his head, a look of grim, paternal certainty on his face. You chased a man who didn't want you. You threw away every ounce of your pride, and you backed him into a corner until he retaliated. You made your bed, Julian. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression sorrowful but firm. He's right, darling. You had this coming. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage. But deep down, in the part of me that wasn't reeling from shock and nausea, I knew they were right. I had sown the wind, and now I was reaping the whirlwind. The next day, the doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning. Elias Thorne had arrived, with his parents in tow, to make good on his absurd, infuriating promise. And I, the alpha who was supposed to be in control, could do nothing but wait for my fate to be decided for me. The Thornes' arrival felt less like a prelude to a proposal and more like a diplomatic summit between two warring nations. Elias stood flanked by his parents, looking impossibly, irritatingly put together. He wore a dark navy suit that made his silver hair seem even brighter, his expression a carefully neutral mask. His father, a man with the same sharp features but a colder demeanor, gave a curt nod. His mother, a stunning Omega with an air of quiet sorrow, offered a strained, polite smile. I was instructed by my mother to remain in the adjacent sitting room, out of the way, while the parents talked. I felt like a child banished to the corner. I sat on a stiff velvet armchair, eavesdropping as their voices drifted from the formal living room. The conversation was a masterpiece of polite, coded language. They spoke of an unexpected development, a unique situation, and the most sensible path forward. They were discussing my life, my body, my future, as if it were a merger agreement. Our families have known each other for years, I heard Elias's father say, his voice smooth and authoritative. Given the delicate nature of the circumstances, a union seems the most logical solution. It will quell any potential gossip before it begins. Indeed, my own father agreed, his voice tight. A swift wedding, before Julian begins to show. It's paramount. My hands clenched into fists on my lap. They were arranging it all, a neat and tidy package to contain the scandal. I wasn't a person. I was a problem to be managed. I zoned out, the low murmur of their voices fading into a meaningless drone. I was staring at a painting on the wall, a bleak, stormy seascape, when suddenly my name cut through the haze. It was Elias. His voice, clear and unexpectedly soft, carried into the room. "Julian, come here." I nearly jumped out of my skin. My head snapped toward the doorway. What game was he playing now? That tone, it was the gentle, placating tone one uses on a spooked animal. It was a performance, and it was insulting. But all four parents were now looking expectantly toward the doorway. I was trapped. Fine. If he wanted to play, I could play too. I rose from a chair, plastered a wide, cloyingly sweet smile on my face, and sauntered into the living room. I let my hips sway just a little more than necessary, my movements deliberately languid. "Elias," I cooed, drawing his name out into 3 syrupy syllables. "I'm coming." I watched with immense satisfaction as his entire body went rigid. A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. If looks could kill, I would have been incinerated on the spot. I glided over to the sofa where he sat and perched myself beside him, leaning in close and batting my eyelashes with exaggerated innocence. "You called for me." I whispered, my voice dripping with faux deference. He didn't answer. He simply took my hand, his grip a fraction too tight. It was a silent, furious command. "Cut it out." I responded by raising an eyebrow and then, to push him even further, I leaned my entire body against his side, draping myself over him like a cheap fur stole. His posture became so stiff I thought his spine might snap. But with our parents watching, he was utterly powerless. He wanted to call me shameless? Fine. I would show him shameless. My parents were staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. My mother's polite smile was frozen in place, her eyes wide with horror. Elias's father, ever the diplomat, let out a hearty, forced laugh. "Ah, look at the two of them," he boomed. "So affectionate. Clearly, they get along splendidly. There's nothing for us to worry about." My father chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. I could feel the waves of his mortification from across the room. The conversation devolved into the tedious logistics of the wedding. Venues, guest lists, dates. I remained slumped against Elias, half listening, a smug sense of victory warring with a growing boredom. He was a furnace of suppressed rage beside me, a silent, vibrating engine of fury. At some point, the drone of their voices and the warmth radiating from Elias's body lulled me into a stupor. My eyelids grew heavy. The next thing I knew, I was floating. Blinking groggily, I found myself being carried. Strong arms were looped under my knees and around my back. I looked up into Elias's face as he carried me up the stairs to my bedroom. "Are they done talking?" I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. He laid me down gently on my bed. Instead of answering, a wry, dangerous smirk played on his lips. "You're not calling me Elias now," he murmured, his voice low and laced with menace. The fog of sleep was receding, replaced by a renewed desire to provoke him. I grinned, a lazy, satisfied smile. "If you really want," I drawled, stretching languidly on the bed, "I could call you something else." I let the silence hang for a beat before purring the most obnoxious, saccharine word I could think of. "Hubby." The second-hand embarrassment was so potent I almost choked on it. But it was worth it to see the look on his face. He didn't react for a moment, just stared down at me as if I were a particularly fascinating and repulsive insect. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, shutting the door with a soft, final click. The moment he was gone, I erupted. I buried my face in my pillow to muffle the sound, my body shaking with silent, hysterical laughter. He had brought this on himself. Every condescending word, every arrogant smirk, had led to this. He thought he could manage me, package me up, and solve his problem. But he had no idea. He hadn't just knocked up some random, submissive alpha. He had created his own personal nightmare. And the fun was just beginning. The wedding was a blur of white flowers, polite smiles, and suffocating hypocrisy. It was a grand affair, orchestrated with military precision by our mothers to present a flawless united front to the world. Hundreds of guests from our parents' gilded circle filled the grand old cathedral, their eyes filled with a mixture of congratulations and thinly veiled curiosity. They all knew this was a rush job. They could smell the scandal beneath the expensive perfume and taste the desperation under the champagne. My most significant point of contention, however, was my designated role in the ceremony. We both wore immaculate white suits, but the efficient script, the positioning at the altar, everything cast me as the receptive partner, the de facto Omega in this sham of a union. It was a public branding, a formal declaration of the very dynamic that had driven me insane. Logically, it made sense. I was the one carrying the child. I was the one whose biology had gone haywire. But every instinct I possessed screamed in protest. This is wrong. He should be the one in the white dress. A ridiculous, stereotypical thought, but it was born of a deep, primal sense of injustice. I would endure it. For now. But I swore to myself, standing there in a suit that felt like a costume, that this would not be the final word. When the officiant began the vows, a litany of poetic nonsense about love and partnership, my skin crawled. I felt like a fraud, a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. Elias, beside me, was the picture of serene composure, his handsome face unreadable, his responses delivered in a clear, steady voice. He was playing his part to perfection. Then came the ring exchange. The ring bearer, Elias's young cousin, approached with a satin pillow. As Elias reached for the rings, my hand shot out, snatching them first. He shot me a sharp, questioning look. "I'm putting yours on first," I muttered under my breath, my voice low and fierce. For a split second, I saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It looked, impossibly, like amusement. I thought I heard a quiet, almost inaudible chuckle escape his lips. He didn't argue. Resigned, he obediently extended his left hand. I seized it, my grip tight, and shoved the platinum band onto his finger. It was a small, petty rebellion, but it was mine. There, I thought with grim satisfaction. Much better. When it was his turn, he took my hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he slid the matching ring onto my finger. A faint, knowing smirk lingered on his lips, and it unnerved me. He knew something I didn't. Then came the kiss. "You may now kiss your partner." The officiant fumbled, unsure of the correct term. I tilted my head up, my jaw set, ready for the sterile, performative press of lips. He cupped my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. It wasn't sterile. It was warm and soft, and for a terrifying moment, it felt real. Then, something changed. His lips parted slightly against mine, and a burst of intense, sweet flavor flooded my mouth. My eyes flew open in surprise. When he pulled back, I was dazed, my mind reeling. In my mouth was a candy. A small, hard, blueberry mint candy, rapidly dissolving on my tongue. It was cool and sharp, the flavor infused with the faint, unmistakable tang of his pheromones, fresh rain and clean earth. It sent a tingling jolt straight to my brain. I stared at him, utterly bewildered. He just smiled, a genuine, private smile that was meant only for me. "A little something to keep you awake," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. Who does that? Who slips their husband a pheromone-laced candy during their wedding kiss? It was cheating. It was psychological warfare. He was deliberately messing with my senses, using my own biology against me. And the worst part? The absolute worst part was that I didn't want the candy to dissolve. I wanted the taste, his taste, to linger forever. I savored the last remnants of flavor as we linked arms and walked down the aisle, showered with rice and fake smiles. The reception was an exercise in endurance. I watched Elias move through the crowd, a perfect host. He was gracious, charming, effortlessly deflecting intrusive questions and accepting hollow congratulations. He was a master of the mask, so composed, so warm on the surface. And I hated that I still found it so damn alluring. I knew the danger, I knew the cold, calculating mind that operated behind those winter sky eyes, but I couldn't stop the pull. I liked him. Even after everything, that was the one, inconvenient, unshakable truth. I had already fallen for this beautiful, impossible man. By the time we finally escaped and arrived at the sterile, modern house he had purchased for us, our gilded cage, I was bone-weary. I collapsed onto the massive bed in the master suite, the silk of the duvet cool against my skin. The room was huge, impersonal, and silent. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sounds of him moving about the house. Then, the silence stretched. A strange restlessness crept in. I sat up. Where was he? I swung my legs off the bed and padded out of the room. I found him in the guest room at the far end of the hall, methodically making the bed. He had his pillow under one arm. My blood ran cold. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up from smoothing the sheets. "I'm going to sleep here. I assumed you'd want your space." He was sleeping in a separate bed. On our wedding night. After slipping me a goddamn pheromone candy that was basically a flirtation bomb. The sheer, audacious hypocrisy of it made me see red. The taste of blueberry and his scent still lingered on my tongue, a phantom sensation that was driving me mad. I wanted more. I wanted to smell him again, to be near him. It was a disgusting, unacceptable craving. Alphas were supposed to be repelled by each other's scents, not drawn to them like an addict. I was breaking every rule, and it was all his fault. "No," I said, my voice tight. He finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. "No. No," I repeated, marching back to the master bedroom. I grabbed my own pillow, my heart pounding with a furious, defiant energy. I stormed back to the guest room and stood in the doorway, holding my pillow like a shield. He blinked at me, a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. He looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal. "And what are you planning to do?" he asked, his voice laced with that familiar, mocking amusement. "Run away from home on your wedding night." I ignored him. I pushed past him, climbed onto the guest bed, his bed, and burrowed under the covers. His warmth was still there, a ghost of his presence in the crisp cotton sheets. His scent clung to the pillow, and I inhaled it deeply, my senses screaming in both protest and pleasure. This bed was smaller, cozier, less like a sterile showroom and more like a real bed. I sighed in satisfaction. Elias stood by the door, watching me. I heard him let out a short, exasperated laugh. "What has gotten into you, Julian?" he asked. "Did you miss me already? So hopelessly in love you couldn't bear a single night apart." The insufferable bastard. Fine. I'd play. I rolled over, propping my head on my hand and giving him my most shameless smirk. "Yeah," I said, my voice a low purr. "I did. I missed you so much. I was lonely and cold and I couldn't sleep. I just had to come find you." I patted the empty space beside me, my smile turning predatory. "So, hubby," I drawled, savoring his flinch. "Come keep your poor, lonely husband company. You wouldn't want me to lose sleep, would you? It's not good for the baby." For a solid 10 seconds, Elias just stood there, frozen in the doorway. I watched, with immense satisfaction, as his brain seemed to short-circuit. His carefully constructed composure, the one he wore like a suit of armor, visibly cracked. A fascinating array of emotions flickered across his face: annoyance, disbelief, exasperation, and then, something else entirely, a dark, flustered red that crept up his neck and bloomed across the tips of his ears. He was rattled. Genuinely, truly rattled. Wordlessly, he shut the door, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. He walked over to the bed with the resigned air of a man marching to his own execution and sat on the edge, his back to me. He let out a long, weary sigh. "I am truly cursed," he muttered, more to himself than to me. 8 lifetimes of terrible karma, and this is my punishment. I grinned, rolling onto my back and stretching like a contented cat. "Glad you've finally come to terms with it." He reached over and switched off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the window. As he made to lie down, as far on his side of the small bed as possible, I acted. My hand shot out and clamped around his wrist. He sighed again, the sound laced with frayed patience. "Now what, Julian?" This was my chance. Seizing the moment, I tugged him closer. With my other hand, I reached for the collar of his silk pajama shirt, pulling it down just enough to expose the pale, smooth skin of his neck. My fingers found the edge of the scent-blocking patch he wore and, with a single, swift motion, I peeled it off his gland. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of his pheromones seeped into the air. Fresh rain. Damp earth. Cool stone. Elias jolted as if I'd zapped him with a cattle prod. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper. "Nothing," I whispered back, my lips quirking into a smile he couldn't see in the dark. I pressed myself against his rigid back, my mouth close to his ear. Just being a little shameless. And with that, I dipped my head and inhaled deeply, my nose right against his gland. It was a strange, almost perverse thing to do. An act of intimate aggression. But he was my husband now, wasn't he? What was so wrong with wanting to smell him? The initial hit was sharp, a pure alpha scent that made every nerve in my body stand on end, my instinct screaming threat, rival, danger. My grip on his shoulder tightened reflexively. But then, something else happened. As the cool, clean freshness of his scent settled into my system, the sharp edges softened. The instinctive restlessness in me didn't just fade. It was smoothed over, replaced by a profound and paradoxical sense of calm. It was a war inside me, biology versus desire. Alphas weren't supposed to crave this. Our scents were meant to be territorial warnings, not calming balms. But I had already broken the ultimate biological rule. What was one more? Falling for Elias Thorne wasn't just breaking instinct. It was rewriting the entire code. And I was hopelessly, terrifyingly addicted. I let out a quiet, frustrated groan and buried my face in the crook of his neck, my voice muffled against his skin. "This is all your fault," I mumbled. "You turned me into some kind of freak who gets off on an alpha scent." His body went completely still. I could feel the sudden tension in his muscles, the way his breathing grew heavier, uneven. Then, in one swift, powerful motion, he tried to break free, to sit up and escape. I was ready for it. I wrapped my arms around his torso, my legs tangling with his, holding him in place. "Where do you think you're going?" I demanded. Under the dim moonlight, I saw it clearly now. His ears weren't just red, they were practically glowing. He gritted his teeth. "Are you seriously asking me that question?" he bit out, his voice strained. "What the hell do you think is happening?" My brain, which had been running on pure, unfiltered impulse, stuttered to a halt. And then, realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. The scent. The proximity. The fact that we were two alphas in a bed and one of us was aroused. My mind went blank, and then my own face burst into flames. I stammered, my bravado evaporating into thin air. Elias made another move to leave, a desperate lunge for freedom. I yanked him back out of sheer, panicked instinct. He shot me a look over his shoulder, a mixture of profound irritation and utter bafflement. "What now, Julian?" I had done this. I had poked the dragon all night, teased him, provoked him, and finally gotten a reaction I hadn't fully anticipated. I couldn't just leave him like this. It was my mess to, well, not clean up, exactly. I hesitated, swallowing hard against a dry throat. "Well," I mumbled, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Given my condition, I technically shouldn't be doing anything too strenuous right now." Elias narrowed his eyes, waiting. I let out a dramatic, put-upon sigh. "But," I continued, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as a new, wicked idea took hold. "I'm feeling extra generous tonight. So, I suppose I could help you out. In a different way." And before he could process my words, before he could protest, I grabbed him by the wrist, rolled him onto his back, and dragged him fully under the covers. Later, much later, I lay exhausted in his arms. He had an arm draped over me, his body heat a comforting, living furnace against my back. The guest room bed was small, but it felt right. One bed, one me, one him. There was no empty space, no cold distance. No matter how we shifted, we ended up close. I tightened my hold on his arm, hugging it closer to my chest, and drifted into the deepest, most dreamless sleep I'd had in months. The world outside could be a chaotic, judgmental mess. But in here, in this small, quiet space, I had finally, strangely, found a sliver of peace. The days that followed our wedding night settled into a strange, new rhythm. An unspoken truce seemed to have been declared. Elias abandoned the guest room without comment, and we began to navigate the delicate, awkward dance of cohabitation. He was an infuriatingly meticulous housemate, arranging his books by genre and then alphabetically by author, and leaving his shoes perfectly aligned by the door. I, in contrast, was a creature of chaos, leaving a trail of coffee mugs, discarded jackets, and half-read magazines in my wake. It should have driven him insane. Oddly, he never said a word about it. My pregnancy progressed, and with it came a host of miserable symptoms. The morning sickness was relentless. My sense of smell became so acute that the scent of my own aftershave made me gag. I was perpetually exhausted, capable of sleeping for 10 hours and still needing a nap by noon. Through it all, Elias was a silent, watchful presence. He started buying bland crackers and ginger ale, leaving them on my nightstand before he left for work. He switched to an unscented soap. One evening, I came downstairs to find him researching prenatal nutrition for alphas on his laptop, a deep frown of concentration on his face. He was taking care of me, but he did it with a clinical detachment, as if I were a complex project he was managing, not a person he was married to. We rarely spoke of anything personal. Our conversations were limited to logistics, doctor's appointments, grocery lists, his work schedule. The fragile intimacy of our wedding night seemed like a bizarre dream, an anomaly we had both silently agreed to never acknowledge. The silence was a chasm between us, and I didn't know how to cross it. My friends, bless their oblivious hearts, decided I needed a post-wedding, pre-baby blowout. They dragged me to our favorite whiskey bar, renting out a private booth in the back. "All right, Croft, spill it," my best friend, Leo, said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial grin. "How the hell did you finally land the Ice King? We all thought he was a lost cause." I swirled the water in my glass, the scent of their whiskey making my stomach turn. "I was persistent," I said vaguely. "He just needed a little help realizing what he was missing." And a little help led to feelings. Leo pressed, raising a skeptical eyebrow. I shrugged, the gesture feeling heavier than it should. Hard to say. Did Elias have feelings for me? Or was this all just a grand, noble gesture of taking responsibility? The uncertainty was a constant, dull ache in my chest. Leo looked baffled. "Then why marry you? The thorns could have paid you off, set you up for life, and made the whole problem disappear. Marrying you, that's a permanent solution." The question hung in the air, the same question that haunted my own quiet moments. I looked at the faces of my friends, curious, well-meaning, and completely clueless about the truth. I couldn't bear their pity. I couldn't stand the thought of them knowing I was the one who had been caught. So, I did the only thing I could think to do. Elite. Or rather, I told a version of the truth that was so skewed it became a lie. "Maybe he married me," I said, leaning back and forcing a smug look onto my face, "because of the baby." A beat of dead silence. Leo, who had been mid-sip, nearly choked on his drink. You two have a kid on the way." I nodded solemnly.
Surprise.
A different friend, a loud, boisterous alpha named Mark, let out a whoop. "No way. You magnificent bastard, you actually did it. You knocked up Elias Thorne. That's legendary." I winced at his volume, but a wave of relief washed over me. This was better. This narrative I could live with. Me, the dominant, virile alpha who had managed to conquer the unattainable Ice King and even get him pregnant. It was a lie that soothed my battered ego. And then Mark, in his infinite wisdom, clapped me on the back and said, "Man, I feel for him. Pregnancy is rough on an Omega. You better be treating him like a king." The lie turned to ash in my mouth. A wave of guilt, so strong it was dizzying, washed over me. I looked down at my own hands, at the body that was currently a battleground of hormones and nausea. I thought of Elias at home, researching vitamins and buying crackers, his silent, tireless efforts to make my life even a little more bearable. He was doing everything for me, and here I was, taking credit for his quiet strength and painting him as the fragile, conquered one. The party continued around me, but I was no longer a part of it. The laughter and loud music felt grating. I was lost in my own miserable thoughts, so lost that I didn't feel the vibration of my phone in my pocket. I had put it on silent during my nap earlier and forgotten to turn the sound back on. It wasn't until I was getting ready to leave, hours later, that I saw it. The screen was lit up with a string of notifications. 17 missed calls, Elias Thorne. 3 voicemails, Elias Thorne. 1 text message, Elias Thorne. My heart stopped. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, seized me. I quickly tapped open the text. "Julian, where are you? Just answer the phone. Let me know you're safe." The message was sent over 2 hours ago. The calm, almost pleading tone was so unlike him that it terrified me more than an angry outburst ever could. I fumbled to listen to the voicemails. The first was clipped, irritated. "Julian, it's late. Call me." The second was more strained. "I'm starting to worry. Are you okay? Please, just call me back." The third one. His voice in the third one was raw, stripped of all its usual defenses. "Julian, please. I just need to know you're all right. You and they. Just call me. Please." I had been so wrapped up in my own pride and lies that I hadn't even considered him. He wasn't angry. He was worried. Terrified. I said my hasty goodbyes and ran out of the bar, hailing a cab with a frantic wave. The ride home was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I burst into the house, my heart pounding. The downstairs was dark and silent. "Elias." I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. I flipped on the living room light and nearly jumped out of my skin. He was there, sitting on the sofa in the dark, perfectly still, like a statue carved from shadow and moonlight. He was just staring at me, his face an unreadable mask, but his eyes were burning with a fierce, controlled fire. I had no idea how long he'd been sitting there, waiting. I had messed up. Royally. And for the first time, I was afraid not of his anger, but of the pain I had so carelessly caused him. I tried to feign nonchalance, a desperate attempt to diffuse the suffocating tension in the room. I dropped my keys on the console table with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in silence. "Hey," I said, forcing a casual smile. "Why are you sitting in the dark? Trying to save on the electric bill?" He didn't respond. He just kept looking at me with that unnerving, laser-like focus. The silence stretched, and my bravado began to crumble. This was worse than shouting. This quiet, intense scrutiny was stripping me bare, layer by layer. "Babe," I tried again, my voice softer as I cautiously approached the sofa. I reached out to touch his arm. "I'm sorry I didn't answer. It was loud. My phone was on silent. I didn't." He pulled his arm away before my fingers could make contact. The rejection was a small, sharp sting. "So, you still remember you have a husband," he said. His voice was deceptively calm, a placid lake surface hiding dangerous currents. "You don't answer your phone. You don't reply to a single message. For a moment there, I thought you'd forgotten you even had a home to come back to." His restraint was more damning than any accusation. I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface, a tightly coiled spring. "That was my fault," I admitted, my voice dropping. "I truly didn't hear it. I swear I wasn't ignoring you on purpose." He turned his head to look at me fully then, and to my surprise, a dry, humorless laugh escaped him. It was a brittle sound. "You really don't get it, do you, Julian?" His tone shifted, the frustration finally bleeding through, sharp and raw. "You are pregnant. An alpha, pregnant with a child whose biology we don't understand, whose effect on your body is a complete unknown. And I had no idea where you were. You vanished for hours without a word. What if something had happened? What if you had collapsed? Do you have any idea how worried I was?" His voice rose with every question, the tightly controlled calm finally shattering. "Do you even think about that? Or do you only think about your fun?" He spat the word out like it was poison. "Tell me, Julian, what the hell am I to you? What is our child to you? Are we just inconvenient accessories to the life you still think you're living?" His words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the opposite end of the sofa, stunned. He saw me as reckless, selfish, a child playing at being a husband and a father. A surge of defensive anger rose up to meet my guilt. I had spent the entire evening defending my pride, only to come home and have it shredded by the one person whose opinion, I was horrified to realize, mattered most. "What do you mean I only care about my fun?" I muttered, scowling at the floor. "Isn't that what this is?" He shot back, his jaw tight with a fury he could no longer contain. I actually thought we could make this work. I thought you were serious about this. But at the end of the day, you're still the same impulsive, reckless idiot you've always been. You can't even offer a proper apology. One day, you are going to drive me to insanity." That was it. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg of my own resentment. I had loved him, chased him, swallowed my pride for him, and this was my reward. To be called an idiot, to be treated like an irresponsible child over one mistake. A sting pricked the back of my eyes, the humiliating precursor to tears, and I fought it back with rage. "You've got to be kidding me." I snapped, my voice rising to a shout. "Oh, you're the only one who gets to feel wrong here? I already apologized. What the hell more do you want from me? You want to talk about responsibility? Then you answer me this, Elias. Why did you really marry me? Are you going to sit there and tell me with a straight face that it wasn't because of this baby? Don't pretend you're some noble saint in all this. I didn't wait for his answer. I couldn't bear to hear it. I stormed out of the room, up the stairs, and slammed the master bedroom door behind me, the sound echoing the final, furious beat of our last fight. The hell, I was sharing a bed with him tonight. I lay in the dark, my body trembling with adrenaline and fury, my heart aching with a pain so sharp it stole my breath. This was it. This was the end. If the baby was all that tied us together, then this marriage was a prison, and I wanted out. I don't know how long I lay there, stewing in my own misery, but eventually, I heard footsteps approaching the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, feigning sleep, my back to the door. I heard the soft creak as it opened, felt his presence fill the room. He stood beside the bed for a long, silent moment. Then, a quiet sigh. "Julian," he said softly, "are you awake?" I didn't move, just made a small, non-committal noise and shifted under the covers. He hesitated, and then the words came, so quiet I almost didn't hear them. I shouldn't have yelled. That was my fault. Please, don't be mad at me. I froze. Mr. I'm never wrong. Mr. Cooler Than Thou. Elias Thorne. Apologized. I flipped over so fast I almost gave myself whiplash. What? In the dim light from the hallway, I saw him avert his gaze, the flush returning to his ears. He was deeply uncomfortable. What did you just say? I pressed, my suspicion warring with a nascent, unbelievable hope. He repeated himself, his voice patient, careful. I said I shouldn't have been so harsh. I was worried, and I let my fear speak for me instead of just talking to you. He finally met my eyes, his own shining with an emotion I had never seen in them before. Please, don't be angry, Julian. You're pregnant. It's not good for you to be this upset. And there it was. For the baby. The hope in my chest curdled. I rolled away from him again, my voice dripping with ice. Wow. An apology. All for the sake of the precious cargo, huh? I felt the bed dip behind me. Then, his arms circled around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. His breath was warm against the back of my neck. It's not just for the baby, he whispered, his voice a low thrum against my spine. My heart hammered against my ribs. He clarified. The smug, emotionally constipated, beautiful bastard finally dropped the act. My voice was muffled by the pillow. Then why? You better make this clear, Elias. Because just because we are married doesn't mean I have to spend the rest of my damn life with you. I felt, more than heard, his quiet laugh. He pulled me closer, his hand coming up to gently stroke my hair. Because of you, Julian, he said, and the last wall around my heart crumbled into dust. I married you because I like you. I wanted this child because you were the one carrying it. I got angry because I was worried about you. Everything that has to do with you, everything revolves around you. Nothing else matters. He paused, and his final confession was a bare whisper against my skin. Because I think I fell in love with you a long time ago, you reckless idiot. I was just too arrogant and terrified to admit it. The world went quiet. All that was left was the sound of my own frantic heartbeat and the steady, reassuring warmth of his arms around me. I had chased a man who didn't seem to want me, and it turned out he had wanted me all along. He had just been fighting it as hard as I had been fighting for him. I grumbled into my pillow. Oh, now you decide to have a way with words. I elbowed him gently in the ribs. So all those times I made a fool of myself? All that groveling? What was that for? Your own private entertainment. He laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh this time. You know, he mused, his voice thick with affection, I'm arrogant. But you, Julian Croft, are even more arrogant. Neither of us knows how to back down. That's why we fight so ugly. He tightened his embrace. So how about this? From now on, I'll put up with you. It's not about putting up with each other, I started to argue, out of pure habit. All right, he cut me off gently. You're right. It's not. It's compromise. Because I love you. And because, whether you'll admit it or not, you love me too. He had it all figured out. He had me all figured out. And as I relaxed back into his hold, I realized that our story hadn't started with a fight or a chase or an impossible pregnancy. It had started with a simple, undeniable truth that had taken us both far too long to see. It had started with love. And now, finally, our life together could truly begin.